Primeiramente, boa noite, gente. Estamos aqui com o professor Richard Felder, né? A gente vai fazer essa entrevista com esse professor emérito, né? Ele é professor emérito de engenharia química na Universidade Estadual da Carolina do Norte. Ele é autor de diversos livros, com destaque nos princípios elementares de engenharia química, né? Que é um livro base que vocês vão ver durante o curso. E hoje a gente vai ter uma conversa, uma entrevista com um professor que vai responder em inglês, mas fiquem tranquilo que a legenda vai estar aqui embaixo, né? Meu rostinho está no cantinho direito inferior para vocês e com ele em destaque. Caso não consigam acompanhar, também tem a legenda do YouTube e todas as outras informações a respeito do professor, das áreas de pesquisa, a gente vai colocar também na descrição. E antes de começar a entrevista, né, a gente quer ressaltar sobre os livros que ele divulga e principalmente o Teaching and Learning STEAM, a Practical Guide, que é um guia de como ensinar tanto alunos e professores a estudar o STEAM, né? Abaixo do link, aqui na descrição, a gente vai ter o link para o livro. Então, gente, é muito legal. Dê uma lida lá no link, vai mostrar como se fossem as abas dos capítulos. E passar a palavra para o professor, para dar um oi.
Ok, muito obrigado. Olá, colegas. É um grande prazer estar com vocês hoje. Só lamento que temos que fazê-lo conectado. Eu preferiria muito mais estar no Brasil com vocês. Há muitos anos, eu tive o prazer de visitar o Brasil várias vezes. Duas como consultor de pesquisas no Instituto de Pesquisas Radioativas em Belo Horizonte, e depois como professor visitante à Unicamp, Universidade Federal de Viçosa e algumas outras universidades. Nessas visitas, eu aprendi a falar português, mais ou menos. E já esqueci a maior parte do que eu sabia. Ainda me lembro o suficiente para dizer as coisas mais importantes em português, como bom dia, tudo bem? Obrigado. Onde é o banheiro? Me dá uma caipirinha, por favor. Mas não me lembro bastante para dar uma palestra completa ou, como hoje, uma entrevista. Portanto, mudarei para o inglês e contarei com os colegas para traduzir. Estou ciente de que alguns de vocês, olhando isso agora, provavelmente falam inglês melhor do que eu. Quando você tiver perguntas para mim, Paulo, fique à vontade para perguntar em português ou inglês. Vou tentar de compreender. Ok. Agora faça-me perguntas e fingirei que sei as respostas.
Perfeito, professor. Bem, gente, como disse, vai ser uma entrevista, então a gente já fez as perguntas, né? A gente tem em mente as perguntas e eu vou dar seguimento aqui. Primeiramente, professor, a gente vai pedir para você se apresentar, falar sobre sua trajetória brevemente e comentar as suas áreas de atuação. A gente quer conhecer o próprio Richard Felder.
Okay. Now, I am not sure that I know the real Richard Felder, but I will try. I got my undergraduate degree and my graduate degree in chemical engineering sometime in the late Jurassic period. And I did a postdoc in England for a year. And then I spent 2 years at Brookhaven National Laboratory doing engineering research. And then I started my faculty career at North Carolina State University. And this was in 1969. And that was my first and last academic appointment. my entire career has been on the faculty at North Carolina State. I retired from the active faculty in 1999, but I continued many of my professional activities. I still wrote papers. I still gave workshops on teaching at universities around the world. I wrote the 2 books. Did I get your name right? Is your name Paulo?
Sim,
Yeah,
professor.
okay. I thought it was. Okay, so I've written that introductory chemical engineering text that Paulo mentioned. I've written another text with my wife and colleague, Rebecca Brent, called Teaching and Learning STEM, STEM. And I don't know if you have that acronym in Brazil, but it stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics. And that book is about how do you effectively teach subjects in those disciplines. So I still am writing papers. I still am giving presentations. I still am occasionally doing interviews at other universities, like I'm doing right now. And that's the short story of my career. And anything else you want to know, just ask.
Perfeito. Acredito que todo mundo vai se sentir inspirado pela sua trajetória. Dando seguimento nas perguntas, a gente vai elucidar o seu livro, né? O que te motivou a escrever o livro Princípios Elementares dos Processos Químicos? Quais foram as dificuldades que você enfrentou ao elaborar o conteúdo?
Okay, how did I happen to write Elementary Principles of Chemical Process? Or I should say, how did I happen to co-write it? Because I did the first 3 editions with my colleague and friend, Ronald Rousseau. And then the book is now in its 4th edition. And besides Ron Rousseau and me, we added a 3rd author who actually did most of the work on the 4th edition. And that's my dear friend and colleague, Lisa Bullard at North Carolina State. So how did the book happen? It started in 1972 when I was a young assistant professor with no tenure at North Carolina State University. And Ron Rousseau was my also new colleague. And I came to the university in July of 1969. Ron came there in August of 1969. So I was his senior colleague. Somebody from the publisher, John Wiley and Sons, came to Ron one day and said, Wiley, the publisher, wanted to publish a textbook in material and energy balances, the introductory chemical engineering course. At the time, there was another book on the market published by a different publisher that had most of the market. Almost all chemical engineering departments used that textbook. And this fellow from Wiley said, we really want a book to compete with that book and take away some of their business. And would you, Ron Rousseau, be interested in writing a book like that? And Ron thought about it for a little bit and said, well, that sounds like it might be fun. Yeah, I'll try it. And then shortly afterwards, Ron came to me and he explained that this had happened. And he asked if I would be interested in coming in with him and working together on this new textbook. And I said, well, that sounds like fun. Sure, I'll do it. Both of us were too young and stupid to know what it was that we had just agreed to do, and what an incredible amount of work it takes to write a textbook. We thought, oh, we'll spend 3 hours a day, maybe for a few months, and we'll write this book, and then we'll go on to other things. That was insane. And it was particularly insane because we were both young assistant professors. We didn't have tenure. We didn't know that in the amount of time it takes to write a book, you could write 50 papers and get them published. And we also didn't know that in a research university, a book counts as one publication. 50 papers count as 50 publications. And so it was an insane decision. But by the time we figured out exactly what we had committed ourselves to do and how much work it was going to take to write this book, we had spent so much time already that we didn't want to lose it, and so we just continued. And 5 years later, we finished the manuscript of the book. It took maybe 6 months to write the actual book, and it took the other 5 or 4.5 years to write the almost 800 problems at the end of the chapters of the book. But we finished it, and it was a stupid thing to do, but sometimes stupid things work out very well. In this particular case, the book started to sell almost immediately. People read it at different universities. They thought, this book looks good. This looks, maybe it's better than the one we've been using. And so they started to adopt it. And as more and more people adopted it at different universities, and the word started to get out that this book is pretty good. Students like it. And students don't like many textbooks. And the fact that the students were responding well and they were saying they were really learning from it, the sales took off. Within 1 to 2 years of the time the book first appeared, we had something like 80% of the market for the book. And it's now 40 years later, and we still have it.
Perfeito. Perdão. Perfeito. Eu mesmo eu utilizei esse livro e realmente a leitura dele é muito boa como aluno em si. Quando você está vendo o primeiro conteúdo pela primeira vez, realmente é muito bom.
Não, muito obrigado.
Bem, dando seguimento às perguntas, dadas as ementas dos cursos de engenharia química ao redor do mundo, né, qual a tendência ou mudança nas tecnologias atuais você acha que irá causar uma modificação nessas, visto as tendências em produtos farmacêuticos, cosméticos e as energias renováveis? Você acha que terá uma grande mudança, assim como foi o petróleo e as guerras, para com a engenharia química?
Okay, that's a very good question. And it's not an easy question because it is asking me to predict the future. And I'm not very good at that, but neither is anyone else. So I will try. Obviously, some things are different now. And as you've suggested, when I started learning chemical engineering more than half a century ago, chemical engineering meant the chemical industry, the petroleum industry, the polymer industry, and that was almost everything. Now, chemical engineering means everything anybody does anywhere. It still means chemicals, it still means petroleum, it still means polymers, it also means pharmaceuticals, it also means specialty chemicals, it also means environmental science and chemistry, safety engineering, and I could go on forever. And many chemical engineering graduates go into chemistry, they go into the pure sciences, they go into medicine, they go into law. And obviously, you can't prepare all chemical engineering students to do everything that happens in all of these different industries. And so something clearly will have to change. But I think what is not going to happen is you're not going to get this department teaching petroleum, this one teaching pharmaceutical, this one teaching finance, design, etc. I think what's going to happen in the future is we're going to have to get away from what I believe Philip Woncott called the tyranny of content. the feeling that somehow or other we've got to cover every single piece of knowledge about chemical engineering that exists in the world in our curriculum. We can't. There's too much information. But we don't have to, because if you ask anyone from, well, take calculus for a simple example. We think it's really important to teach 4 semesters of calculus, 3 courses in calculus, and another course in differential equations, at least, and maybe more. If you take most practicing chemical engineers who are out there in industry, who have been working for maybe years as chemical engineers, and you ask them this question: when is the last time you saw a derivative in calculus? You know what they're going to say. 99 out of 100 of them will say, the last time I saw a derivative was when I was in college. I just don't use them anymore. If I need to solve a differential equation, I'll put it on MATLAB or Mathematica and have it solve the equation, which it does better than I can. And so all of those hours and hours we spend teaching the detailed mathematical facts and formulas, we don't have to, because most of them are not going to use them anyway. Some will. But there are many, many things that they will be using when they're out in industry that we didn't teach them because we didn't have time. So what happens? They learn when they go out there. The companies know what they need to know to solve the jobs that they're assigned to solve. And so the companies teach them what they need to know that they didn't learn when they were in school. And more, I think in the future, we're going to get away from the notion that the only way we can teach students can learn something is if we tell it to them. And if we don't tell it to them, they can't learn it. And both of those are wrong. What I think we're going to be doing more of in the future is not teaching students things, not teaching them facts, not teaching them formula, but teaching them how to learn, how to take a problem that's new to them, that they haven't seen before, and figure out, what do I need to know to solve this problem? What do I need to know that I don't know that they didn't teach me in school? And how am I going to find that out? What books am I going to get that can help explain it to me? What people working around me know those things and can help me with them, and will be perfectly willing to help me with them, but they're not going to come looking for me saying, how can I help you today? But if I go to my boss or my colleague down the hall who knows something about this, and if I say, this is the problem that I've been assigned to work on, there are a few things that I don't understand. I wonder if you could help me or point me to some place where I could go for help. They will. We don't teach our students how to do that as professors of engineering now. Nobody taught us how to do it. We don't teach them how to do it. And so they have to learn on their own when they leave us and go out to work. What I see happening more and more in our chemical engineering, in our engineering curriculum, and in our science curriculum, for that matter, is starting to give students the tools they need to figure out for themselves and with others' help how to solve the problems that they're going to be confronted with. And that, I think, is the main difference between the engineering curriculum of the past and the engineering curriculum of the future.
Perfeita colocação, professor. Acredito que tomara que siga nesse sentido de eles, os professores, ensinando a gente a aprender, né? Não eles têm todas as respostas, mas a gente aprender a procurar as respostas.
Yeah. Now, there's also one more thing. Nobody taught us how to do that. How are we supposed to teach these students how to do something nobody ever taught us to do? Well, there's one other big thing that nobody ever taught most professors how to do, and that is, how do you teach? Most college professors, most college professors go to their first job without so much as 5 seconds of preparation on how do you do that. You're supposed to get up in front of students and present them with information and teach them how to do this or that, and now teach them how to think and teach them how to solve problems before they've been taught how to do it. Can we teach that to others when nobody taught it to us? And the answer is yes, we can, but we need to do some learning ourselves first. There are some really good books out there on how to teach. The book that you mentioned in the introduction, Teaching and Learning STEM, that Rebecca Brent and I wrote, is one such book. I think it's a good book for learning how to teach science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, but there are other very good books out there too. So most engineering professors never look at a book like that. I think in the future, they're going to start. They're going to have to, because we're going to have to start learning to teach this way. There are also some very good programs, workshops, that are given all over the world. Rebecca and I have been to Brazil several times and have given workshops at several Brazilian universities. Other people have done the same thing. Engineering professors normally don't go to teaching workshops, but if they want to learn how to teach the way we're going to be having to teach in the future, that's something that's going to have to start happening too. Faculty development done by engineers for engineers. It's already been happening for decades in the United States, starting to happen elsewhere in the world, starting to happen in Brazil. And another prediction for the future is this is going to be a more and more important part of faculty development. Not just how to get up in the class and write equations on the board, but how to teach students to do these things for themselves.
Concordo. Citando, tem um professor meu que até comentou que quando ele começou a dar aula, ele travava. Tipo, ele congelava e não conseguia dar aula, e ele disse que teve que aprender isso como se fosse na marra, né? Uma gíria.
Right.
Bem, continuando. Como sabemos, o senhor sempre se importou, né, sobre como melhorar o ensino de engenharia química. Como é que você pensa que deve ser a metodologia de cobrança de conteúdos ou as abordagens em assuntos específicos da engenharia química, que os alunos têm muitas dificuldades, tais como cálculo de reatores, modelagem e simulações de processos e fenômenos de transporte? Bem como na pergunta passada, que você comentou que existem esses softwares de MATLAB, que é só jogar a fórmula e eles vão te dar a resposta pronta.
Okay. So the first thing we need to do is change the question. The question is not, how are we going to teach students to do all of these things, to solve equations, to design reactors, to do this, to do this, to do this, because that's back to the content, right? And the assumption is that our job is to teach the students how to do this. And the traditional way of teaching the students how to do this is we write equations. I wrote equations on the board. Now people are writing equations on document cameras and putting them on slides and showing them and doing it on desk pads and whatever. But we're still writing things and saying things, and the students are sitting there and listening to us and watching us. And by some magic process, they learn how to do it this way. And they don't. The traditional way of teaching does not teach. The only way students learn how to do these things that you were talking about, how to derive and solve the equations and design the distillation columns and all of that, they don't learn it by sitting and watching us do it. They don't learn it at all that way. They learn it by, after we've done that, by going home and trying to do it themselves and realizing that what seemed very clear in the lecture that I gave them this morning at 9 a.m., if you're a good lecturer and you speak clearly and slowly, the students are nodding their heads All right. Oh, yeah, I understand that. Oh, that makes perfect sense, what he just put on the slide and so forth. And they leave that classroom thinking, oh, that was great. I really understood that. And then they go home to try to work on a problem that's similar to what you did in class that day. And they spend 3.5 hours struggling with it, and they can't do it. They'll spend hour after hour. There are always more unknowns than there are equations, and they keep writing the equations and running around in circles. And 3.5 hours later, they still may not have the problem solved, or they may end up with a result that 5 equals 5 or something equally useless. So what was the problem? If I'm a good lecturer, why couldn't they learn it from my lecture? It's because that's not how brains work. The human brain is a magnificent instrument, but we know a lot. The scientists, the cognitive scientists, the brain researchers have discovered a great deal about how the brain works and how learning happens. And how learning does not happen is I tell you something and you know it. The only way we learn anything, the only way you and I learned what we know is by trying things and generally failing the first time we do it and figuring out, why didn't that work? What did I do wrong? And then maybe looking back at the textbook or the course notes and saying, oh yeah, he said this here, I completely missed it. Maybe over here, what I should do instead of this is that, and then maybe it'll work. And now I've learned something about how to do it. The only way we learn is through experience, by trying things out, generally failing at first, either learning from our mistakes or somebody helps us, and we try it again, and we're better at it. The problem with the traditional mode of lecturing is that all I am doing is pouring information out at you like a fire hose, right? The other thing about the brain is when information comes into our brain, we are trying to get it into our long-term memory. Once it's there, it stays there forever. That doesn't mean we can recover it anytime we want, but it's there permanently. But it just doesn't go from the lecture into our long-term memory. First, it goes into working memory. Working memory is where we do all of our conscious processing. If you're aware of something right now, like my image on your screen, like the words I'm saying to you, the information is in your working memory. If it weren't, you would not be conscious of it, okay? The thing about working memory, it has a very limited capacity for information processing. We only have room in our working memories for about 4 plus or minus 1 bits of information at a time. When I'm lecturing, I'm pouring hundreds of bits of information at you, right after another in a continuous flow. And that's not all that's getting to your brain. You're sitting in my classroom. You're seeing me up in front of the room talking. You're seeing slides over there with other information. You're looking out the window and you're seeing the leaves on the trees blowing, which is where you want to be right now and not in my lecture. You're looking over at your neighbor who is texting a friend and exchanging messages and laughing quietly, all right? And then over here, another of your classmates is doing something else, and you just got a message on your cell phone, which is in your lap. And so you're looking at that. All of that information is coming at you simultaneously. And you only have room for 4 pieces of information that you can process at any one time. What do you think happens to the hundreds and hundreds of bits of information that that lecturer is putting out? Nothing is happening to it. It never gets to your brain. It's filtered out. You never see it. You never hear it. And so it's no surprise that after a lecture, even a lecture the students thought was good, if you gave them a test on the content of that lecture, they would fail it miserably. But we expect that our students to sit through our lecture and then be able to go out and do what we were trying to teach them how to do. It doesn't work. So if that doesn't work, what does work? Two things. One, we have to get away from the idea that we've got that everything we want our students to learn, we have to say in class. And that means we put it all on slides, flash them at a subliminal rate, expect them somehow to get into the students' brains. They won't do it. What we have to do is decide what is the really important information that I want these students to get. I can't get them all of the information. The brains can't absorb it. So I've got to decide what are the main messages I want them to get from this lecture. And then I have to hit them with those messages repeatedly. But that's not all. I have to give them an opportunity to do the only thing that leads to real learning, which is trying things. So I may give a short lecture on how to solve this particular equation. And then I may say, okay, you just saw me give an example of this method that we're using to do this calculation. Here's another problem that asks you to do the same thing. What I want you to do is get yourself organized in the class into groups of 2 and 3 where you're sitting, right? Then I'm going to give you in your group 2 minutes to see how far you can get in solving this problem, which is like the one that we just did. Okay, everyone understand? Good, go. And I turn them loose for 2 minutes, 30 seconds, however long I want to give them to do that short calculation. And then I stop them. And then I'll call on some of them. And they know I'm going to do this. I tell them up front. You know, I'm not just going to give you the answer after you've done this. I'm going to call on you to tell me what you did. All right, so group 3, somebody in group 3, tell me how you started this. Or I might say, Susan, what did your group do? And Susan tells me what they did. And if it's correct, I'll write it on the document camera or the board, the whiteboard, whatever is there, so that everybody has it. Okay, if Susan is wrong, I may correct. I'm okay. Yeah, you're probably thinking about this, but you also need to consider that. All right, Harry, what about your group? And I'll just quietly move on. And we'll get through the entire calculation this way, with them repeating to me what they did and the correct answer going up on the board. That approach is called active learning. And that's my principal answer to what do we need to do in our teaching that we're not doing now. It is engage the students actively during class, getting them to try the things you want them to be able to do when they go home. Two things happen when I use this approach. I've just given them their 2-minute exercise. Some of the groups get it. They figure it out in the 2 minutes I gave them. If they did that, they own it. They know how to do it. They obviously understand how to do it because they did it. Okay? Now, other groups will struggle for the 2 minutes and they won't get it. Right? They'll try for the 2 minutes and they won't figure it out. But now when the answer is coming out, which it always will, and the students in the class, and there are always some students in the class who are smarter than me and they get everything. All right. And I know that if I can't get the answer from somebody else, I can call on one of them and they'll give it to me every time. All right. But now the students who struggled and couldn't get it, that struggle is very important because now they're really ready to hear how to do it. They've gotten the message. This is something I need to know how to do. It's probably going to be on the exam. I don't know how to do it because I just tried with my colleagues and we failed. So now when the answer is coming out, they're paying attention to it. Their ears are pointing straight up. all right? And if I say something or the student says something and they don't understand it, the hand will go up. Professor, I didn't understand. Where did that number come from? And I'll go back over it again. And now, when they leave that class that day, 50 minutes later, whenever it is, those students understand how to do that problem in a way that never happens in a traditional lecture. And now when they go home, instead of 3.5 hours to try to solve this similar problem because there was one little point that they missed during the class, the chances are very good that in the 15 minutes it takes to solve that problem, they're going to be able to do it. And I could stop this presentation right now. I give workshops, and we've filled the book that Rebecca and I wrote with suggestions of different things you can do to accomplish different things. But if I just stopped there, I said, this is active learning. This is how it works. Go back to your class and start doing that. Find out something about how to do it by reading our book or some other book that talks about it, and start doing it in your class, and start slowly. Do a little bit of it just to get used to it, and gradually increase the amount you do, and don't do anything else that we're suggesting, and it will revolutionize your teaching, and your students are going to end up learning in a way that you would never have dreamed possible before. Long-winded answer, but that's probably the most important point I'm going to make in this interview.
Perfeitamente. E a gente vê bastante problema, principalmente agora no EAD, né? Aqui no Brasil a gente chama de EAD, mas como pela pandemia, né, a gente teve aulas virtuais, né, no caso. E justamente é
Yeah,
uma via de mão dupla. Tanto o aluno tem que se
yeah,
comprometer,
virtual, yeah, online education.
é, e justamente é bem esse ponto. Então, eu agradeço mais uma vez, porque realmente isso é um assunto que professores também deviam ouvir, não só alunos.
Yeah,
Mas eu acho que
yeah.
esses alunos de agora podem vir a se tornar professores e serem professores melhores, né?
Mm-hmm.
Bem,
So what is the question?
não, eu vou dar seguimento, eu só estou comentando mesmo.
Oh, okay.
Bem, continuando as perguntas, com a vinda das
Oh, yeah,
indústrias.
Paulo, let me interrupt for 1 second. Since the issue of online education
Ah,
and
sim. Uhum.
the teaching by Zoom, which is certainly something all of us have had to learn to do. People ask me, okay, so, active learning is a good thing in a traditional classroom when you're face to face with the students, getting students to work in these small groups. Okay, let's suppose that that's a good technique, like you said, but I'm teaching online. I'm teaching my class by Zoom. Now what am I supposed to do? All right, they're not sitting in front of me. And the answer is very simple. Use active learning. You can do active learning online, and many professors in the last 2 years have learned this. If you're teaching with Zoom, or you're teaching with Google Meet, or go to Webinar, or a number of these other programs, you can still get students actively engaged. I'm teaching a class of 150 students online. So I'm looking at my screen, and I'm seeing 150 tiny little boxes with images of students on them. And I'm trying to teach them how to solve this kind of problem, or derive this kind of equation, or whatever it is. What can I do? And everything I can do in a traditional live classroom, face-to-face, by way of active learning, putting students to work in small groups for short periods of time to solve challenging problems, and then bringing them back to me and calling on them to report to me what they did and make corrections. I can do that on Zoom just as well as I can do it in a live classroom. Now, instead of telling them to lean over to the students sitting next to them, I put them in breakout rooms on Zoom or whatever program you're using, and have them do exactly the same thing, and it works exactly in the same way. I don't like it nearly as much as I like I love teaching traditionally. I love having a bunch of students sitting in front of me, listening on a good day, working themselves, working individually, working with each other, coming back, asking questions. I love that. And I get so much energy from the students that at the end of one of those periods, I feel exhausted because I've been putting a lot of energy out, but I also feel energized because I've been getting it back from them. I can't do that online. You just don't get the same energy back from students.
Sim.
But the teaching method that I use is just as effective, just as possible. It takes a little more learning how to do it and to become good at it, like it does with traditional teaching, but it is possible, and it's the answer to all of the same questions about how do I teach effectively.
Perfeito. Realmente pior. É, justamente isso mesmo. Bem, eu vou dar seguimento com as perguntas. Bem, com a vinda das indústrias 4.0 e o grande número de alunos formando a cada ciclo acadêmico, como você vê o mercado de engenharia química em relação aos profissionais formados? No caso do Brasil, a gente não tem uma indústria de ponta tão robusta como a dos Estados Unidos, e perguntamos isso no sentido de como é que a gente vai transformar essas pessoas que detêm esse conhecimento, porém não tem uma alocação no mercado de trabalho após a conclusão do curso.
Okay, so now what you are doing, Paulo, is you are speaking to me like you speak to other Brazilians. Okay, so that was a little too fast for me to get the full sense of the question. You're asking something about the market for chemical engineering graduates is changing, and I didn't quite get what the question was. You're muted, Paulo. I can't hear you.
Perdão. A gente vê as indústrias chegando, né? E quando a gente termina a graduação, não se tem uma alocação no mercado de trabalho. Então, a gente se sente um pouco perdido na parte de o que fazer após a graduação. Se você tem algum, não diria algum guia, mas uma perspectiva de como mudar isso. Se devemos buscar empreender ou procurar a área acadêmica.
Okay, so what's the job market for chemical engineers in the future? Where are they going to go to work?
É.
Okay. I don't think that has been a problem in the United States. And I don't think, well, I don't know. I mean, you know better than me what the situation is in Brazil. But I would really be surprised if in Brazil, in the future, and in almost any other developed country in the future, that will be a problem, provided that what we were talking about before in terms of how we teach our students comes about. If we remain focused on, I've got to teach the students everything there is to know about the petroleum industry. I've got to teach the same courses that we taught 40 years ago. They've got to get 3 semesters of unit operations. All right, they've got to get the course in reaction engineering and the course in process control and so on. Then the problem you raised could be a real problem, because there probably will be fewer job openings for graduates to go into those specific fields. They're historical fields, they're old fields, and more of those jobs are moving to developing countries where the labor is cheaper. But if we get away from the idea that we've got to teach this content, and this content, and we start working on skills, how to develop skills in students, skills in problem solving, skills in thinking creatively, skills in thinking critically, skills in working in effective teams with each other, which are not the things that we have traditionally taught. No matter what new jobs come up, those skills are going to be needed. There won't be as many jobs in the petroleum industry, maybe, in the future, in the polymer industry. Pharmaceuticals are likely to be continuing jobs because they keep developing new drugs. The environmental problems that we're facing are not going to go away. I wish they would go away, but they're not going to go away. They're going to keep getting worse. As global warming continues, the number of threats to our environment are going to keep increasing, and it's going to take better and better technology to solve those problems as they come up. We're not going to run out of a need for people who are capable of working on solving environmental problems. Energy. Our traditional energy sources are drying up, in some cases literally. Sooner or later, we're going to run out of petroleum, right? Renewable energy, we're not going to run out of. Solar energy, wind energy, hydraulic energy. Those are going to go on as long as the Earth goes on. And that, I hope, will be for quite a long time. The challenge will be, how can we take those forms of energy that we're not going to run out of and make it economical to use them? You're going to need a lot of very, very good, clever engineers to solve those problems. And the more we rely on these renewable energy sources, the more engineers we're going to need to work on them. What the graduates are going to need to be able to do is not design distillation columns, is not design continuous third tank reactors, is not design centrifugal pumps. We already know how to do all those things very well, and the machines can do them better than we can. But to solve these other new challenges that keep coming up, that they didn't teach them to do in school, they're going to know how to do what? They're going to know how to learn. They're going to have to know how to take new problems that nobody ever taught them to do, figuring out what they need to know, how they're going to find it out, where to go for help, how to decide what's going wrong, why isn't this working, and so on. And as long as we're teaching those skills to our students, there will be no shortage of places that they can go to work when they graduate.
Eu estou tomando isso como inspiração, professor, porque é justamente esse o problema que muitos alunos enfrentam, principalmente nessa parte assim de estou passando por esse problema na aula, né, de não sei como calcular um reator, porém eu fico pensando no meu futuro se eu irei algum dia calcular um reator, né, que justamente depende da minha alocação do trabalho.
And you will find out where to go to learn that, and you will find out how to find people who are ahead of you and who can help you and who will help you. And it'll be much easier for you to do if your professors start teaching you how to do those things.
Perfeito. Para finalizar as perguntas, queremos saber quais suas perspectivas para o futuro. O que você pretende ainda fazer como professor, como escritor e como viajante?
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, probably not very much, because I am very old, and after a while, you decide, okay, let's turn this piece over to somebody who's younger than I am, because there are still many things I want to do. And for as long as I have time to do it, and I'm in good health, fortunately, I expect to have time to do quite a bit more. What I want to do now is, I'm not teaching actively anymore. I'm not going in and teaching another 50 to 100 students material and energy balances or thermodynamics or unit operations. Much more than that, what I'm doing is teaching teachers. The things that we've been talking about so far today are the kinds of things that I'm trying to get across to my colleagues at universities, both department heads, senior faculty members who are mentors to the newer ones, and to the newer faculty members, and to graduate students who are thinking of going into academic careers. The things that you and I have been talking about, I'm trying to communicate to them and give them ideas about, here are the kinds of things that you should be focusing on teaching your students. Not the knowledge so much, not the details and the facts, but the skills, the thinking skills, the problem-solving skills, the skills that are technical, and the skills that are interpersonal, teamwork skills, good communication. All of these are very, very important, and we don't do a good job of teaching them now. And what I'm trying to do with my writing and with my presentations and with interviews like this and workshops at universities that invite me to go and talk to their teachers, that's my main focus now on the professional side of my career. And there are also many places in the world that I have visited, that I love. And I'm not just saying this because I'm on an interview at a Brazilian university, but I love Brazil. Brazil is one of my favorite countries in the world. I love many things about it that I've learned on my visits there. The people I've met are wonderful, the warmest people in the world, I believe. I have enough Portuguese to be dangerous, and I can communicate with people, which when you go as a pure tourist and you don't know the language, you can't really see the country. And while I have a lot more Portuguese to learn, I have enough now that I can go into people's homes and converse with them, and I want to do that again. And also, there's no place anywhere near where I live that you can get a really good feijoada completa. And I want to live long enough to do some more of that. And so there are places like Brazil, Italy, which I love, other places in the world that I want to go back to. And there are places that I haven't been yet, that I haven't met the people, but I understand they're beautiful and the people are very friendly. And I want to get to some of those places. So between trying to teach people how to teach better and seeing places that I love and going to new places that I want to find out about, I think I'll have enough to keep me busy. Plus, I have 7 grandchildren, and they take up a fair amount of time all by themselves.
Perfeito. Queremos agradecer mais uma vez a sua presença. Acho que todo mundo que está assistindo, que vai assistir essa entrevista, né? Vai que a gente alcança pessoas de outros países também, né? E queremos agradecer em nome do Diretório Acadêmico de Engenharia Química. A gente está aqui representando a Universidade Federal de Uberlândia, né? Que é a minha universidade. E mais uma vez gostaríamos de agradecer você pela entrevista, por ter aceitado o convite. A gente pensou que o senhor não iria responder, né? Aí a gente foi numa tentativa que ainda bem que deu certo. Gostamos muito dessa entrevista.
De nada, é muito prazer para mim. Obrigado.